Laura and I had been together for a little over a year when we decided to move in together. It wasn't something I had planned for. Really, I was comfortable in my small apartment, and she had a cozy place of her own across town. But after months of late nights at one another's places, more toothbrushes and socks migrating back and forth than I cared to count, we figured it was time. She was the kind of person who made the world brighter. She could turn a bad day good just by showing up. She wasn't perfect, of course, no one is, but she was the kind of person you wanted around. When she laughed, it lit up a room. When she smiled, you felt like everything was going to be okay. So when we moved into a slightly larger place together, I was excited. My brother Kyle thought it was too fast. He warned me that moving in with someone was the quickest way to ruin a good thing. "You're going to find out all the weird stuff she does," he said, shaking his head. "And you're not going to like it." I laughed him off. I didn't believe him. For the first couple of weeks, things were great. We were in that honeymoon phase where even the quirks you noticed felt endearing. She'd always hog the blankets at night, and I'd find her socks tucked into the strangest places. But it was all part of her charm. We were happy. Then I started noticing the whistling. At first, it was just a small thing, barely noticeable. I'd catch her doing it while she was cooking or in the shower, a little tune, always the same, looping again and again. It wasn't loud or intrusive. In fact, it was kind of cute, like she had her own personal soundtrack. The melody wasn't anything I recognized, just a few repeating notes that sounded faintly nostalgic, like something you'd half remember from a dream. But as time went on, I realized just how often she did it. It wasn't just in the shower or while cooking. She'd whistle while folding laundry, scrolling on her phone, even when she was staring out the window. At first, I didn't mind. It was just a little background noise, a harmless habit. But the more I heard it, the more it got stuck in my head. It was hard to explain. The tune wasn't unpleasant exactly. If anything, it was almost too catchy, but it burrowed into my brain in a way that felt wrong. I found myself whistling it absent-mindedly when I was at work or out running errands. It was like the melody had become part of me, echoing in my head even when Laura wasn't around. One night while we were lying in bed, I asked her about it. "What's that song you're always whistling?" She looked at me, her brow furrowing. "What song?" "The one you're always whistling," I said. "You do it all the time. It's been stuck in my head for days." She laughed softly. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't whistle that much." I wanted to argue, but the look on her face told me she wasn't lying. She genuinely didn't seem to realize how often she did it. I shrugged it off, telling myself it wasn't a big deal. Everyone has little habits they don't notice. This was just one of hers. No harm done, right? But over the next few weeks, the whistling started to feel different. It wasn't just something I heard now and then, it was constant. I'd hear it when I was trying to work, trying to read, trying to sleep. I couldn't escape it. It was always there, faint but insistent, just loud enough to pull my focus from whatever I was doing. And then, I started hearing it when Laura wasn't around. If she was in the shower, I'd hear it coming from the bathroom. If she was cooking, it echoed through the kitchen. But sometimes, I'd hear it when I was alone. The soft whistle drifting through the walls like a ghost. I started losing patience. One night, after hours of struggling to finish a report for work, I snapped. I marched into the living room where Laura was watching TV. "Can you stop?" I blurted. She blinked at me. "Stop what?" "The whistling," I said louder than I meant to. "You've been doing it all night." She frowned. "I'm not whistling." "Yes, you are." I snapped. "I can hear it. You've been whistling that same damn tune for hours." She stared at me for a long moment before shaking her head. "I think you're hearing things," she said, turning back to the TV. Her words hit me like a slap. Was she messing with me? Or did she really not realize what she was doing? Either way, it didn't feel like the woman I'd fallen in love with. I stormed back to my office, fuming. The days that followed were worse. I started avoiding Laura, spending most of my time in the bedroom with the door closed. But even there, I couldn't escape the whistling. It was softer now, more distant, but it was always there, like it was coming from inside my own head. I started wearing headphones, blasting music just to drown it out. But the tune slipped through the cracks. The breaking point came one night. I came downstairs to find Laura standing in the kitchen, cooking dinner. She was whistling, louder this time, the same maddening tune. "Laura," I said, my voice shaking, "can you please stop?" She turned to face me, her expression blank. "I'm not whistling," she said flatly. "Yes, you are," I shouted. "You're doing it right now." Her lips curled into a faint smile, but her eyes didn't match. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said softly. Something inside me snapped. Before I knew what I was doing, I grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the counter and swung it at her. The sound of the impact was sickening. She crumpled to the floor, her head hitting the edge of the counter on the way down. Blood pooled around her, dark and viscous. For a moment, the apartment was silent. Then I heard it. The tune. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. My heart stopped. I looked down at Laura's body. Her lips were moving. She was still whistling. The sound filled the apartment, louder than ever, relentless, drilling into my skull. It's been 2 days now. Laura's body is still lying in the kitchen, her unseeing eyes fixed on the ceiling. She hasn't moved, but the whistling hasn't stopped. It's louder than ever, driving me insane. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know how to make it stop. But if it doesn't, I'm afraid of what I might do next. When I was about 11 years old, I lived with my 17-year-old sister, Monica, and my grandmother. One evening, I was sitting at the table, eating dinner with my grandma, when Monica suddenly rushed inside our home. "You're late," Grandma commented, but Monica didn't respond. Grandma called over to her to join us for dinner, but she just walked right past us and went straight to her room. "Teenagers. So moody," Grandma muttered. I was pretty close to my sister. We weren't that far apart in age, and we could usually talk about anything. She did have a tendency to be moody, but I could feel that something was different about tonight. After dinner, I gently knocked on her door. "Everything okay?" I asked. "I just need to be alone right now," she replied softly. I shrugged and headed to my own room, followed closely by our family dog, Snoopy. That night I couldn't sleep. I felt restless, anxious. There was no reason for it, I just felt something was wrong. Hours passed, and I gave up on trying to sleep. It was nearly 3 a.m. I decided to take Snoopy for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet and calm. The air was still, almost too still. Snoopy was happily sniffing around when I heard a rustling noise from a bush a few meters in front of us. A shape emerged. It looked like a mangy black dog. There were a lot of strays in this part of town, so I wasn't too surprised. I continued forward, but Snoopy didn't move. I looked down and was shocked to see him crouching low to the ground, his body stiff, his lips curled back in a snarl. "It's just a dog, Snoop," I whispered, tugging on his leash. But Snoopy didn't budge. His snarl turned into a deep, guttural growl. I looked back toward the stray dog and watched as the dark figure stood up. It rose slowly, stretching to its full height. That was no dog. At that moment, Snoopy lost control. He started barking wildly at the creature, his hackles raised. My heart pounded. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I turned and ran. Snoopy bolted beside me, his leash dragging behind him. I could hear it. Heavy, booming footsteps pounding the pavement behind us. Then, a voice. Low, taunting. "Gaurav." I refused to turn around. My grandmother had always told me, never engage with a spirit that calls your name. That's how you invite it in. I kept running, my breath ragged, my chest burning. Up ahead, a temple. Our neighborhood had many temples, almost one every 200 meters. I sprinted toward the nearest one and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me. Silence. The footsteps outside slowed. They stopped. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Snoopy and I stayed there until the sun rose. When we got back home, my grandmother and sister were already at the dining room table, eating breakfast. I saw something last night, I blurted out. It was this thing. It was chasing us. I struggled to find the words to describe what I had seen. But I didn't have to. Grandma's face darkened. You didn't talk to it, did you? She asked. No, of course not. Good. She nodded. It was most likely a Shava. A what? A shapeshifter. An illusionist, Grandma said grimly. They are created when an unborn child dies and the proper rituals aren't performed. Since the child never had a true earthly form, it takes whatever form it can. Usually something malicious. Monica gasped. Her hands clenched into fists. Where did you see the Shava? Grandma asked. Near that open field, where all the stray dogs gather. Monica went pale. Grandma nodded solemnly. That makes sense. There used to be a hospital there. It was shut down years ago, after they discovered a doctor had been performing unauthorized abortions. A choked sob escaped Monica's lips. Monica? I asked, confused. What's wrong? She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Then, suddenly, she burst into tears. The Shava. It's my fault, she whispered. Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Gaurav. She turned and ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. I looked at Grandma. She sighed. She's just being moody again. But I knew better. I didn't fully understand what had happened that night. Not until years later. Not until I learned the truth. That Monica had been pregnant. And she had made a choice. And now something was hunting her. Something that had never been given a name. And it was still out there. Waiting. Watching. Whispering. Next time.